Hello. Since the invasion of Crimea back in 2014, Ukraine had been in an uncomfortable standoff with one of the largest military forces on the planet. And then, on February the 24th of last year, Russian troops and armoured tanks rumbled into Ukraine. Russia was at its doorstep once again, but this time with much larger takeover ambitions. What a difference 16 months makes. Russia had expected a swift victory, taking a page out of the German Blitzkrieg playbook from World War II, expecting Ukraine to fall without any real resistance, and to be fair, many in the West expected the same. But then Ukraine heroically and unexpectedly pushed back its much larger invaders for most of the year, reclaiming much of the eastern territories that had been invaded and forcing the partly demoralised Russian forces into an effective stalemate. This week, Ukraine has finally launched a significant attempt to claim back its territory. And this video is about how artificial intelligence is being used in that counteroffensive and how it's turning the tide in favour of the Ukrainian defenders in the war against Russia. I'm Tim Elsom, and the very first thing we should do is... You're watching EYE4AI, bringing the very latest in artificial intelligence to all of humanity.
Dance for me, dance for me, dance for me, oh. I never seen anybody do the things you do before.
At an AI and War summit a few weeks ago, the CEO of Palantir, Alex Karp, one of the most vocal providers of AI-enabled military systems and software to Ukraine, spoke about the war.
The old way of targeting, where you don't use, where algorithms aren't used, is clearly a failure. And if you go into battle with old school technology, even if you're spending $65 billion a year and you're highly accomplished warfighters like Russia, and you have an adversary that knows how to install and implement digitalized targeting and AI, you obviously are at a massive disadvantage.
It's clear that AI is going to play a significant role here, as well as in future wars, with AI systems now able to identify enemy forces, predict their movements, identify potential threats from the huge amount of structured and unstructured data. They're even acting as lethal weapons with an ever-increasing level of autonomy on the battlefield. You may have thought the race to regulate the likes of ChatGPT for the comfort of their citizens was at the top of every government's agenda right now, but in reality, the appetite to fast-track the AI weapon systems of the future to guarantee each nation's security is equally as active, just less visible. You've probably seen the many TikToks or shorts of the war in Ukraine with a smart drone here or there, but there's a lot more going on than that. Consider all the main areas that make up warfare: intelligence gathering and analysis, target identification and prioritization, planning and logistics, simulation, tactical decision support, target engagement, battle damage assessment, and the predictive analysis that then starts that loop all over again. AI is being trialled, tested, and literally battle-hardened like never before, and in almost every single domain of the war. This is truly the first war where AI could be the difference between success and failure. So come with me now as we dive into our imaginary planning for the Ukraine counteroffensive powered by artificial intelligence. Let's assume Ukraine have contemplated a number of different scenarios and locations for the counteroffensive, and it looks like they're doing just that. In reality, they're already probing and testing a number of these areas to test for weaknesses, as well as to confuse the enemy with a good old fog of war. There's much talk of what the military commanders like to call shaping going on right now. I should add at this point that nothing, nada, zip of what I'm about to share here in terms of military options is anything other than very public domain information. I'm neither military strategist nor fortune teller. So if anyone from the Russian intelligence services is watching right now to pick up some tips, I have only one thing to add. Okay, so Ukraine have literally a gazillion options, and here's just three. They could break south down from Zaporizhia around the eastern end of the Kakhovka reservoir that's currently flowing out to the west of Nikopol, and head towards the city of Melitopol on the Azov Sea to sever the territories under Russian control into two and cut off supply lines between the Donbass and Crimea. Another idea that had gained traction, at least before the Kakhovka Dam was breached last week, would be an assault from Kherson across the Dnipro River and its wetlands and marshlands, which are now largely, unfortunately, underwater. And given Ukrainian troops had been probing Russian defences there for months, that was certainly a possibility. Or how about Donetsk? Ukraine could launch a counteroffensive across the entire Donetsk province on the eastern side to break the Russian sieges of Bakhmut, Avdiivka and Marinka. An offensive through this region would take the Ukrainian army forces right to the gates of Donetsk, the largest Russian-controlled city, which has been occupied by the Kremlin troops since the outbreak of the Donbass conflict in 2014. I'm going to keep it simple and ignore the likelihood of multiple fronts, as well as diversionary tactics, which frankly is most likely. No, we want to ultimately pick just one here as our primary objective: how to go about that task using AI. As Napoleon once famously said, war is 90% information. Right now, that's truer than ever. In fact, in the current information age, that percentage has got to be even higher. Much of the information in war comes from understanding the location, identity, strength, movement, and potential strategies of the opposition forces. And this has always been at the heart of intelligence gathering efforts. Take World War II. Back in World War II, reconnaissance aircraft would fly over the enemy territory, fitted with all manner of cameras, taking swathes of images of the ground that would then be flown back, processed, stitched together by hand, and by the end of the same day, they were being studied by the 1,700-strong team across the enormous tables of the Central Interpretation Unit at Danesfield House in Buckinghamshire in the UK. Here they try and identify the scale and strength of enemy troops and their movements that would ultimately define or amend the future military strategy or tactics of the day. But in the current war in Ukraine, things are a little different because of both technology and AI. They didn't start the war with a very advanced arsenal of intelligence assets, but through a combination of support from other countries, a large number of commercial deals, as well as their own ingenuity, they now have arguably better eyes and ears than Russia. And using AI means they can capture information, analyse and make better decisions on the battlefield than the much larger Russian forces. Firstly, satellites. Ukraine has use of a number of satellites now, both commercial and military ones. The military ones are kept under pretty close wraps, but the commercial ones less so. So, for example, today we know Ukraine is using the Hawkeye 360 satellite network, which flies about 20 satellites, each the size of a car battery, that track and geolocate radio transmissions. Ukraine are also using the Planet network of hundreds of tiny CubeSats that manage to photograph the entire planet every day. Another commercial satellite company, Capella, whose equipment can see at night and through clouds, and that cover Ukraine as much as 80% of the time, are also providing imagery as well. But going one step further, you probably didn't know that Ukraine effectively now has its own satellite. A group of crowdfunders who'd set out to buy some Turkish drones were left wondering what to do with the $16 million that they'd raised after the drones, in the end, were gifted to them. The Kiev government instead signed a contract with a Finnish company, EYE4AI, who handed over exclusive use of one of its orbiting radar satellites to the Ukrainian armed forces. All of this has allowed Ukraine to put together a high-impact constellation of spy satellites to gather intelligence without having its own space launch facility. So what do these satellites do, and how do they use AI, more importantly? In a similar way to the image capture and analysis of the Tesla full self-driving car that I talked about last week, but with some obviously key differences. I'll put the link to that video in the description. The satellites first have to capture high-quality images. How do we do that?
When working with deep learning and images, usually you will turn towards convolutional neural networks, or an evolution, such as capsule networks. But with satellite images, you will have to keep in mind three things. The first one, as we said before, our images are really big. This means that your network won't be able to process all of it at once, and you will have to divide it in smaller tiles before putting it in your network. The second thing is that your image may have more than 3 color channels, not just red, blue and green colors. So your whole pipeline will have to be able to take care of all of these channels and to take them into account or not. And the last thing, but the most important, is that you have to consider that these data are georeferenced. So, in the end, you want to have your vehicle detection geopositioned not only in the image, but on the Earth's surface.
Now, the best known resolution of commercially available satellite data to Ukraine is around 30 centimetres per pixel. The maximum resolution of US military satellites, such as the Keyhole platform, is suspected to be as good as 5 centimetres per pixel, but we don't know for sure. Until recently, the Russian Persona satellites, and there were 2 of them, were only good for about 50 centimeters per pixel. So you can already see that Ukraine possibly does have that better 2020 vision than Russia. Although, of course, this can change with each and every launch of a satellite into space. When you then take that imaging into account and then apply AI neural networks to remove, adjust useless frames like ones with clouds or ones with cloud shadows or perhaps those with haze, then you create a much more powerful data set. You can then apply what in the satellite industry is called super resolution, which uses AI convolutional neural networks again to algorithmically derive higher resolution images from lower resolution ones. A little like the upscaling your TV does, that also uses AI to best guess the context of the surrounding pixels that it's trying to predict. Satellite images are usually factors of magnitude bigger than your standard iPhone photo. That's because they're capturing huge areas, 1 square kilometre, possibly greater in one picture, and at resolutions as high as the 5 centimetres per pixel I mentioned. So taking those cleaned images and downloading them to a ground station requires AI to usefully geolocate those images onto a world map, as well as start to break down the components of each image using convolutional neural networks into different tiles, such as land, water, trees, roads, which then further provides the CNNs the ability to prioritise land tiles, for example, and search for objects such as fortifications, trucks, armoured transports, tanks, artillery, or even ground troops. And again, pre-training is used to enhance the accuracy of the AI. But AI isn't just used for image recognition and image analysis. Oh no, once objects have been identified, there are a number of different use cases that can be deployed. Pattern recognition being one, where AI algorithms can be trained to recognise patterns or anomalies in the satellite imagery. By analysing the historical data it captures and learning from patterns, AI can identify deviations or changes that may indicate suspicious activity. This obviously helps in monitoring military installations, detecting troop movements, or identifying potential military enforcements arriving. We can also track objects moving across vast areas with AI and using predictive analysis to estimate what mission they're undertaking, where these objects are headed, and what routes they will take. Supporting the satellite imagery, and at a much higher level of resolution, albeit with more risk of attack, are drones. Ukraine also have many aerial reconnaissance vehicles utilising AI. They've, for example, deployed significant numbers of the Turkish-made Bayraktar TB2 for reconnaissance, which can take images down to just about 1 centimetre per pixel. Its AI algorithms allow it to fly autonomously, navigating, avoiding obstacles and making real-time adjustments according to its sensors. And it uses its cameras, thermal imaging, and synthetic aperture radar to detect, identify, and autonomously track objects onto the ground, depending upon their visual, heat, or radio wave signatures. AI plays an important role in electronic warfare too, and not only in the information, disinformation, and the psyop spaces of the media and the internet. In fact, the shh advert at the start of this video was hacked into thousands of TVs across Crimea, no doubt sending chills or thrills through the watching audience. So, as the heads of the Ukrainian armed forces, we sit and we evaluate all this information we now have at our disposal. We know the location of the large majority of the Russian forces. We've a good sense as to the identity of those forces, from the most highly trained Spetsnaz forces to the recently conscripted armies. We know their numbers and we understand what support they have in terms of artillery, ground vehicles, tanks. We know how they move and the patterns that they adopt to recce the area around them. And we know where their supply and logistics hubs are, as well as their chains of command. We know where the highest and lowest value targets are, and we know where the opposition looks strongest and where it potentially looks weakest. We even know their morale and what they're most concerned about or most confident in from their most personal eavesdropped conversations. What we now need to do is to work out which one of these 3 potential counteroffensive strategies that we identified a moment ago is most likely to succeed. So, based on all this intelligence, it appears that there are maybe 2 worthy of further analysis. Striking south down from Zaporizhia to Melitopol looks potentially strong and strategically important. Equally, we like the look of a broad offensive across the Donetsk province to the gates of Donetsk and the largest Russian-controlled city in Ukraine. How do we test these scenarios in a way that gives us confidence as well as crystallising the possible risks of each of those approaches? One where we can make mistakes now without risk to life that will almost certainly save lives in the battles to come. It's now time to plan, simulate, and plan some more. Before the war had even started, the Ukrainian Defence Simulation Centre had already been created, providing a battlefield simulation facility to the armed forces with a range of scenarios for tactical decision-making, mission planning, as well as joint operations. In March of this year, American generals and Ukrainian officers met in Wiesbaden for the first time to conduct military simulation games to help plan the possible counteroffensives in the coming months. High-ranking officers from both sides took part in the exercises at what is the US Army's HQ for Europe and Africa. This was labelled as a good old-fashioned exercise, the sort favoured by military commanders since the beginning of organised warfare, with maps and markers to represent the forces of both sides. But don't believe that for a minute. What made it different was not only did it come with some of the most advanced insight and intelligence of a battlefield ever likely produced in war, but it was just one part of the process. The to and fro of the discussions and ideas about which had the most merit versus which came with the greatest risks didn't just end with the gut feel and the razor sharp, but still human limited analysis of the combined experience of the commanders that were there. Nope. The scenarios were also evaluated and tested and simulated and then amended time and time again with an array of AI-enabled military platforms that Ukraine have been given access to over the past 15 months. So, as we step into the simulation war room, we can see that the AI-powered tools are creating virtual environments that accurately replicate the entire theatre of war. Specific target areas, including the terrain, infrastructure and enemy forces, as well as our own forces across land, air and sea. They'll help us plan, visualise and evaluate different scenarios and strategies. The AI algorithms will generate dynamic and intelligent opponents within our simulations and will adapt the behaviour and tactics based upon the reactions of the data that they've been trained against. In this case, they've been trained against not only the historic information available on the Russian forces in Ukraine, but in combat elsewhere, as well as the minute-by-minute actions that we take in the simulation too. Machine learning algorithms will analyse the decisions we make and will predict the most likely outcomes, showing us where they could have been improved by taking alternative decisions. Ultimately, this will allow us to predict through many hundreds of thousands of minor variations in the simulations to determine which of the counter-offensive scenarios is likely to play out to our best advantage, as well as the steps we should take along the way to maximise that advantage. We can't be sure of all the platforms that Ukraine have access to, and some are almost certainly top-secret collaborations, but we do know from their commercial partners alone that they're using a number of these. We know, for example, that Ukraine have use of a strategic military simulation platform developed by Presagis called Command Professional Edition. It uses AI and provides an environment for operational, strategic level planning, training and analysis that allows you to create enormous scenarios and then evaluate the strategies and the outcomes of each of those scenarios. It's available to consumers as well as global military powers, but given the cost of the professional edition can run to $1 million per annum, I think I'll be sticking to World of Tanks for now. We'll probably never know, but the Ukrainians may well also have access to some of the US systems we know about, like the Joint Conflict and Tactical Simulation, JCATS, or the Joint Theatre Level Simulation, JTLS, both which are used to plan, simulate and train for joint and combined military operations. The more strategic JCATS supports a terrain area of about 2,000 square nautical miles for its war games. Either way, for sure, that big old sand table in Wiesbaden was just a tad more tech-enabled than was suggested at the time. At a tactical level, Ukrainians have been training for those sorts of engagements against Russian capability with various tech that's been landing on their doorstep. Military instructors from Canada and Norway and Poland have been training the Ukrainians in virtual simulators and in live fire and manoeuvre exercises for the new Leopard 2 tanks that use AI models for the scenario predictions. That's going on in Poland right now. And Ukraine are also certainly using virtual battle space as well, which is another commercial military simulation platform that provides a high-fidelity virtual environment for mission rehearsal and analysis. VBS supports lots of different aspects of military operations and also covers land, air and sea domains as well. As part of both simulation and in the war itself, AI is also proving vital in logistics. As we saw in the initial Russian invasion of Ukraine with the 40-mile line of military vehicles stuck heading towards Kiev, and a number of times since when Russian forces have either been able to advance or they've been forced to retreat as a result of failed supply lines. This can be a huge Achilles heel of military forces. With AI analysing these maintenance patterns, suggesting preventative maintenance, detangling combat supply chains and providing minute-to-minute logistical advice, our commanders will have an advantage over their opponents who've fallen behind in the race to develop and deploy these tools. We can optimise the resource allocation and ensure the timely delivery of critical supplies. And it's clear that whilst Russia continues to struggle in this regard, Ukraine now have some of the best AI technology platforms to support their logistical planning as well. And so, with our scenarios fully simulated and tested, the supply and logistics organised, our forces positioned, the latest satellite imagery poured over, the intelligence analysed, reanalysed and checked again, the AI algorithms have guided us forward, our decision made. We strike out south from Zaporizhia and towards Vasilivka, Tokmak and ultimately the city of Melitopol on the Azov Sea, to split the Russian forces in two and cut off the critical supply lines between Donbass and Crimea. As attack helicopters fly overhead to strike key defensive positions ahead of us, and our artillery bombardments pummel the well-dug-in Russian troops, our armoured divisions pour south, advancing in protection of our following land forces, and all the time our AI solutions continue to be at the centre of operations. Palantir have themselves claimed to have supplied Ukraine with AI solutions not only to improve the targeting systems, but are likely also using their strategic platforms such as Meta Constellation, that uses AI to rapidly collate that satellite information we were talking about, as well as Gotham, another AI platform that provides for simulation and decision making across a whole theatre using structured and unstructured data to give an integrated and real-time view of all the data sources in one place. Palantir also has SkyKit, which are autonomous and portable intelligence centres reportedly gifted to Ukraine that can be used across the battlefield. These house built-in monitors, rechargeable power supplies to process intelligence and data on the ground, designed to improve decision-making and drone guidance and allowing small groups of soldiers to process data and make more informed decisions anywhere across the battlefield. As we attack the Russian forces, the many AI algorithms on offer aid in both our targeting and precision strikes. Computer vision algorithms analyse real-time video feeds from drones and other platforms, providing target tracking and identification. They calculate the optimal trajectory, considering environmental factors and target characteristics to ensure the most accurate and effective strikes. Our autonomous weapon systems, guided by AI algorithms, engage targets whilst minimising collateral damage. Bayraktar TB2 drones fly overhead to their targets, which once verified can calculate the necessary parameters for engaging the target and deploying its munitions accordingly, completely autonomously, making real-time decisions to maximise the success of the mission without any human intervention. US-provided Switchblade 300s, faster than the Turkish drones, and super small, weighing about 5 pounds, are launched by a pocket of ground troops facing stiff resistance at the perimeter of Tokmak Airport to the north of the city, from a one-person grenade launcher. Designed to take out opposing forces, again with autonomous capability, these are nicknamed kamikaze drones for good reason. Meanwhile, one of our Bayraktar drones has sent back over 300 images of military personnel from its autonomous mission to the outskirts of Melitopol, where it was sent to investigate an area highlighted by the ICEYE satellite surveillance as a potential high-value target, and possibly a Russian command and control centre. Without having to manually wade through all the images, the pictures are fed into Clearview AI, the software from the still controversial facial recognition software company that's built up a database of 30 billion faces from the public. That includes you and me, by the way. You're welcome. Within seconds, it's generated 2 high-probability hits for senior ranks in the Russian military. They're identified as a Major General and a Colonel from the 22nd Army Corps of the Black Sea Fleet from personal pictures scraped from their vKontakte profiles. vKontakte is a Russian social media site. An Su-24 Fencer bomber is loaded with an AI-enabled Storm Shadow cruise missile, which is tasked with taking out the command and control centre along with the high-value targets. The Storm Shadow is a 5-metre-long, 1,000-pound precision fire and forget cruise missile system programmed before launch. Once launched, it can't be controlled or commanded to self-destroy, and its target information can't be changed either. Mission planners program the weapon carefully with details of the targets and its air defences. The missile then follows a path semi-autonomously on a low flight path, guided by GPS and terrain mapping to the target area. Once near the target, the missile lunges upwards, tossing off its pointy nose cone and exposing the infrared sensors within. And here it uses its elevated vantage point to scan the ground below. And here it searches for anything that resembles the preloaded satellite images of the target using an AI-driven technology called DSMAC. Using deep reinforcement learning, The neural network-based agent chooses an action according to its policy and gathers data from the environment. According to the collected possible trajectories, the agent then adjusts its policy to maximise the sum of future rewards. In this case, the maximum damage to the identified target. Further south, a Leopard 2 tank battalion, along with supporting ground forces, is advancing in armoured vehicles, and they're entering the outskirts of Tokmak itself. Some of the troops disembark to continue on foot, and they carry the bare minimum kit and ammo with them. A handful of Themis unmanned ground vehicles drive off a support truck and align themselves as pre-programmed and according to their AI. Each Themis is a small tracked vehicle about 2 metres long and carrying around 1,500 pounds of weapons and ammunition, and travelling at speeds of up to 12 miles per hour for as long as 15 hours. It's fitted with LiDAR, thermal cameras and infrared cameras, and can be missioned to support our ground offensive, moving between the friendly forces to distribute ammunition and weapons, reacting to opposing forces and unplanned events using these deep learning algorithms. Depending upon how it fares in its first war, we may even mount the 30mm autocannon on the Themis for future missions. The transition from AI and intelligence gathering and simulation to the autonomous drone technologies haven't yet made the full transition to automating the battlefield itself. Kamikaze drones are one thing. Roving, mobile, killing machines with artificial intelligence on the ground are not yet readily available. But what's being tested here in Ukraine will certainly pave the way for the fully automated battle robot of the next war. And so turning to some of the defensive AI capabilities, and whilst not strictly AI at the moment, it could certainly get an LLM makeover one day, and I can't pass over talk of a good chatbot. A chatbot unlike any you or I have used, though, this chatbot has turned any Ukrainian civilian with a smartphone into a digital resistance fighter, able to gather and share military intelligence as they report troop movements via the secure chat system EYE4AI, or E-Enemy, as it's called. So, as we reach further south towards Ukraine, the chatter on EYE4AI is an invaluable supplement to the intelligence we're receiving from elsewhere on the battlefield. Further to the northwest, our amphibious troops are moving off the south bank of the Kakhovka Reservoir at Vasilivka, thanks in part to the fleets of German Sea Fox that were deployed over the last week in the water previously laced with deadly mines by the Russian forces. The Sea Fox, an autonomous underwater drone, automatically has been identifying underwater objects and using an integrated homing sonar, destroying identified mines with its built-in large caliber-shaped charge. As a result of its success, only one of the 20 Special Forces 40-foot armoured speedboats was damaged in the fast crossing just before dawn. Further south, on the outskirts of Tokmak once more, our forces have set up a forward acoustic monitoring station as a volley of Russian missiles streak northwards overhead. One of the best success stories coming out of the war so far has been the ingenuity of the Ukrainians themselves and their Zvuk AI-powered acoustic monitoring solution to tackle the constant stream of missiles and artillery, as well as enemy aircraft. Connecting each new Zvuk to the network of multiple devices using the Starlink connectivity, which is allowed for defensive but not offensive purposes, has stretched that coverage of the entire monitoring platform further south and into Russian-held territory, which gives the opportunity for even faster reaction to the Russian missiles by accurately assessing their speed and direction and using machine learning technology that recognises the sounds of different enemy aero engines. The information's relayed instantly back to the S-300 missile defence teams situated south of Zaporizhzhia that with this faster and more specific information have a much greater chance of bringing down the Russian missiles. This is just about one of 40 such complexes across Ukraine. In order to train the Zvuk system effectively, many hundreds of hours of manual data labelling was carried out, which supplemented the existing dataset with noise sound samples corresponding to real missile sounds. Everything worked smoothly, but there were lots of false positives to start with. Initially, Zvuk was identifying the mooing of cows as an enemy target, and because there were relatively few recordings of cows mooing available, it took the team a month to train the system to treat cows as friends, not foe. So, as our counter-offensive progresses and our troops move forward, we're having both tactical successes as well as taking inevitable casualties and battle damage. Computer vision algorithms analyse post-strike imagery and sensor data to determine the extent of damage inflicted on the enemy targets. Our AI evaluates the impact of the operation, identifies remaining threats and provides insight for subsequent tactical adjustments. And our AI algorithms are analysing all the data collected during the counter-offensive operation to identify trends, patterns and potential vulnerabilities. Predictive analysis now helps us anticipate the enemy response at each turn and plan for future operations. AI algorithms continually assess the readiness of our own forces as well. not just in terms of supply and logistics, but also predicting wider resource requirements, as well as recommending areas for more training and improvement. So we pause, draw breath, and turn again to our information screens, knowing that our counteroffensive has started. It looks like it's within the guide rails of our simulations, and we've made our first clear and important inroads into the enemy-held territory. Our mission to reclaim Ukraine is underway. Of course, this was just a scenario, and perhaps an optimistic one, but one we worked through to show just how important AI could be to the war in Ukraine, especially when you're up against Russia, a global superpower, and your forces are no more than a fifth of their size at most. The war in Ukraine is, without doubt, an AI war. An AI laboratory. The conflict is unique. Unprecedented funding, international engagement, support from across public and private sectors in a setting that could continue for several months or several years. The fact that the conflict is ongoing allows these companies to adapt and improve their AI systems each and every day, because that's where AI-enhanced systems are so different from conventional ones. The longer they're deployed, the more data they collect, the more training they receive, the better they get at war as a result. So, like it or not, this war is going to be a major stepping stone towards the networked battlefield of the future, where AI is front and centre of both defence and attack. All I hope is that by the time the singularity arrives, we haven't created the technology that will decide we're frankly far too dangerous to be allowed to continue to squabble and fight amongst ourselves, and instead, AI decides to eliminate us for the sake of the planet and for just a little peace and quiet. My name's Tim Elsom. You've been watching EYE4AI, bringing the very latest in artificial intelligence to all of humanity.
Say,